The vast expanse of the Indian Ocean glittered under the fierce equatorial sun, its surface shimmering like molten gold. By the early 17th century, these waters had become the stage for one of history's most relentless struggles for supremacy. The Dutch-Portuguese War, a conflict fueled by ambition, greed, and the allure of exotic spices, raged across the seas and into distant lands, forever altering the course of global trade and colonial empire building. In 1602, the Dutch Republic, a burgeoning maritime power, had established the Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie, VOC, or the Dutch East India Company. This commercial juggernaut was not merely an enterprise but a weapon of war, equipped with its own ships, soldiers, and the authority to wage battles on behalf of the Dutch state. The VOC's singular aim was to wrest control of the spice trade from the Portuguese, who had monopolized the trade routes to the east for over a century. For the Dutch, this war was not just about wealth but survival, as their fledgling republic sought to assert its place among Europe's great powers. The Portuguese, on the other hand, were the seasoned masters of the seas. Their empire stretched from the ports of Goa and Malacca to the distant shores of Brazil. They had built a formidable network of fortresses and trading posts, their navigators mapping uncharted waters and their ships bristling with cannons. But by the dawn of the 17th century, the Portuguese grip on their empire had begun to weaken. Corruption, overextension, and the union of the Portuguese and Spanish crowns in 1580 had left them vulnerable. Now, they faced a new enemy, one that was as cunning as it was determined. The clash between these two powers began in earnest at the heart of the spice trade, the Moluccas, or Spice Islands, in present-day Indonesia. These islands, rich in cloves and nutmeg, were the crown jewels of the trade routes. Portuguese garrisons, nestled in fortresses like Ternate and Tidor, struggled to maintain control. The VOC's first expeditions, led by seasoned commanders like Cornelis de Houtman and Stephen van der Hagen, sought not just to trade but to oust the Portuguese entirely. On the island of Ambon, where the sweet scent of nutmeg perfumed the air, a bloody confrontation unfolded. The Dutch, having forged alliances with local sultans weary of Portuguese domination, launched a series of sieges on Portuguese strongholds. Cannons roared, their iron balls smashing through ancient walls, while soldiers clashed in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Among the Dutch ranks was Peter van den Broeke, a young and ambitious merchant soldier whose keen mind and sharp instincts made him indispensable to the VOC. Van den Broeke had a talent for negotiation and had quickly risen through the ranks, earning the trust of his commanders. In one particularly harrowing battle, the Dutch forces, supported by their local allies, laid siege to the fortress at Ambon's Lahar. The Portuguese, led by Captain Diogo de Mello, fought with the desperation of men defending both their lives and their livelihoods. Days turned into weeks as the two sides exchanged fire. The heat, disease, and scarcity of supplies took their toll, but the Dutch resolve was unyielding. When the fortress finally fell, it was a moment of triumph for the VOC, yet it came at a great cost. The bodies of the fallen littered the ground, a grim testament to the ferocity of the struggle. For Peter van den Broeke, the victory was bittersweet. Among the casualties was his closest friend, Willem Vos, a fellow officer whose cheerful demeanor had been a source of light in the dark days of the campaign. As Peter stood over Willem's grave, he vowed to see the war through to its end, to honor his friend's sacrifice and ensure that the VOC's mission succeeded. The war was not confined to the east. Thousands of miles away, in the Atlantic, the Dutch and Portuguese clashed over the lucrative sugar trade in Brazil. The Dutch West India Company, a counterpart to the VOC, launched audacious raids on Portuguese settlements along the Brazilian coast. In 1624, the Dutch captured Salvador, the capital of Portuguese Brazil, in a bold and unexpected assault. For a brief moment, it seemed that the tide of war was turning decisively in the Dutch's favor, but the Portuguese, buoyed by their Catholic allies and a deep-seated pride in their maritime heritage, struck back. A combined Spanish-Portuguese fleet retook Salvador in 1625 after a protracted siege. Among the defenders was a young Portuguese officer named João da Silva, whose cunning tactics and unshakable courage earned him the admiration of his comrades. João's exploits would become the stuff of legend, a symbol of Portuguese resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. As the war dragged on, the Dutch adapted their strategies, focusing on weakening the Portuguese through economic warfare. The VOC established a foothold in Batavia, modern-day Jakarta, transforming it into a bustling hub of trade and military operations. From here, the Dutch launched expeditions against Portuguese-held ports, striking at the heart of their rivals' empire. Peter van den Broeke, now a seasoned commander, played a key role in these operations. His daring raids and shrewd diplomacy won him both allies and enemies in equal measure. In 1607, a decisive encounter unfolded off the coast of Goa, where the Portuguese armada, commanded by the formidable Admiral Martin Afonso de Castro, faced the Dutch fleet under Admiral Jacob van Heemskerk. The Battle of Goa was a spectacular display of naval warfare, with towering galleons and nimble frigates maneuvering in a deadly dance. Cannons roared and smoke filled the air as the two fleets clashed. Heemskerk, a brilliant tactician, used the Dutch fleet's superior maneuverability to outflank the Portuguese. By the battle's end, the waters were stained red, and the Portuguese armada lay in ruins. The victory at Goa marked a turning point in the war. The Portuguese grip on the Indian Ocean began to falter as the Dutch seized one stronghold after another. Yet, the cost of these victories was immense. Peter van den Broeke, now an aging veteran, bore the scars of countless battles, both physical and emotional. He had witnessed the horrors of war and lost friends and comrades along the way. But he also saw the fruits of their labor, the VOC's dominance over the spice trade and the establishment of a Dutch colonial empire. By 1611, the Dutch-Portuguese War had reached a tenuous stalemate. Exhausted by years of conflict, both sides sought to consolidate their holdings and rebuild their strength. The Treaty of The Hague, signed in 1641, would eventually bring an end to the hostilities, formalizing Dutch control over many former Portuguese territories in Asia and Africa. For Peter van den Broeke, the end of the war was both a relief and a bittersweet conclusion. As he stood on the shores of Batavia, watching the sun set over the horizon, he reflected on the sacrifices that had been made and the lives that had been forever changed. The war had reshaped the world, carving new trade routes and altering the balance of power. Yet, for those who had lived through it, the memories of the conflict remained etched in their hearts. The Dutch-Portuguese War was more than a battle for spices and wealth. It was a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of those who dared to challenge the status quo. It was a story of ambition, betrayal, and perseverance, a chapter in history that would continue to echo through the centuries. And as Peter van den Broeke prepared to return home, he knew that the legacy of the war would endure, a reminder of the unyielding human spirit in the face of adversity.